I stared at the wedding invitation in my hand, the cream-colored cardstock feeling heavier than it should. The envelope had arrived at my parents' old address, forwarded twice before reaching my apartment in Boston. Someone had slapped on extra postage with the efficiency of a person who couldn't be bothered to check if the original amount was sufficient. The address label read Miss Vance in that generic font that screamed bulk order, no personalization, no warmth. My lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Rebecca was getting married, and apparently, my presence was more of a formality than a desire. I set the invitation down on my desk at the U.S. Attorney's office, where case files for United States v. Morrison Enterprises towered in neat stacks around me. Through the window, the John Joseph Moakley United States Courthouse stood against the gray Boston sky, its presence a daily reminder of the weight I carried in my work. 3 years as an assistant U.S. attorney, and my family still thought I was a glorified secretary. The irony wasn't lost on me. I pulled out my phone and texted my acceptance. The response came hours later, a simple K from my mother. Not, "We're so glad you can make it," or "Rebecca will be thrilled," just K. I should have been used to it by now, this casual dismissal, but it still stung in that dull, familiar way that old wounds do. The weeks leading up to the wedding were consumed by Morrison, a multi-state money laundering operation with ties to offshore accounts in the Caymans. I worked 16-hour days, survived on coffee and the occasional protein bar, and fell into bed each night with legal briefs dancing behind my eyelids. Judge Thorne checked in regularly, his gravelly voice over the phone an anchor in the chaos. He had been my mentor since my clerkship days, the one person who saw past the quiet exterior to the sharp legal mind underneath. When I mentioned the wedding, he insisted on attending. I tried to dissuade him, explaining it was just a family thing, nothing special, but Judge Elias Thorne was not a man easily dissuaded once he set his mind to something. Besides, he pointed out, he had known me since I was a nervous 25-year-old fresh out of Harvard Law, clutching my first legal pad like a life preserver. He wanted to meet the family I rarely spoke about. I should have warned him. I should have explained that my family and I existed in parallel universes that occasionally, awkwardly intersected at holidays and major life events. But I didn't. Maybe some part of me wanted him to see, to understand why I threw myself into my work with such fierce dedication. When you don't feel valued at home, you find value elsewhere. The morning of the wedding, I stood in front of my closet for 20 minutes, debating. I finally chose a tailored navy dress and matching blazer, understated but expensive, the kind of outfit that whispered rather than shouted. My reflection in the mirror showed a woman who looked competent and professional, maybe a little too serious for a wedding. I loosened my hair from its usual tight bun, letting it fall in soft waves around my shoulders. There, less attorney, more sister. Though I suspected it wouldn't matter much either way. The drive to Grandview Country Club took 90 minutes through Connecticut's winding back roads. The club sat on a hill overlooking a pristine golf course, its colonial-style clubhouse gleaming white against manicured lawns so green they looked artificial. Cars lined the circular drive, expensive sedans and SUVs reflecting the afternoon Sunday. I pulled my modest Honda into a spot near the back and took a deep breath. My phone buzzed with a text from Judge Thorne saying he was running late, tied up in an emergency hearing. I told him not to worry, that I'd see him there. I should have turned around right then. My mother intercepted me before I even made it through the entrance. Diane Vance was 58 but could pass for 45, thanks to good genes, better skincare, and a standing appointment with the best colorist in Hartford. She wore a champagne-colored dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and her smile was the practiced kind that never quite reached her eyes. "Eleanor," she said, and I noticed she didn't use Ellie, the name everyone else called me. Eleanor was reserved for moments when I had disappointed her, which was most moments. "You actually came." "Of course I came," I replied, keeping my voice even. "Rebecca is my sister." "Yes, well," my mother's gaze swept over me, cataloging and dismissing in one efficient motion. "Rebecca was worried you might, she thought perhaps your work might keep you away, or that you might not feel comfortable." The subtext was clear. Rebecca worried I would embarrass her. I was the family's quiet disappointment, the older sister who had somehow failed to launch properly into the social sphere my parents valued. Never mind that I had graduated summa cum laude from Georgetown before Harvard Law, never mind the clerkship with a federal judge or my current position. To them, I had chosen a path that didn't include the right clubs, the right social circles, the right kind of success. I wouldn't miss it, I said, and moved past her into the entrance hall. The Grandview Country Club was everything my family aspired to be. Old money, tasteful elegance, the kind of place where memberships were inherited rather than purchased. Crystal chandeliers hung from coffered ceilings. Arrangements of white roses and peonies stood on every available surface, their perfume thick in the air. Well-dressed guests mingled in clusters, champagne flutes in hand, their laughter the practiced kind that came from years of similar events. I scanned the seating chart near the entrance and found my name at table 18, the last table, near the kitchen doors and the restrooms. with people I didn't recognize, the Hendersons, the Chens, the Kowalskis, not family, not friends of the bride, the overflow table for obligatory invites. I felt something cold and heavy settle in my chest, but I kept my expression neutral as I made my way across the room. My father stood near the bar, holding court with a group of men I recognized as his golf buddies. Richard Vance was 62, silver-haired, distinguished in the way that successful financial advisors often are. He caught my eye and raised his glass in my direction, a gesture that might have been acknowledgement or dismissal. I couldn't tell anymore. I thought about the last real conversation we'd had, 6 months ago, when he suggested I should consider leaving my government job for something in the private sector, something that paid better. Something that would make me a more attractive prospect for the kind of men he and my mother wanted me to marry. I didn't bother approaching him. Instead, I found my seat and settled in next to Mrs. Henderson, who introduced herself and her husband with the enthusiasm of people grateful to have someone to talk to. They were friends of the groom's parents, visiting from Ohio, and they seemed genuinely nice. We made small talk about the venue, the weather, the beautiful bride. They asked what I did, and I gave my standard vague answer. I work for the government. They nodded politely and didn't press. People rarely did. The ceremony began at 4 o'clock. We filed into the garden where white chairs were arranged in perfect rows, facing an arbor dripping with flowers. I took my seat in the back, several rows behind where my parents sat with Rebecca's friends. The string quartet played softly as the wedding party processed down the aisle. Rebecca appeared last, a vision in silk and lace, her dress a masterpiece of delicate beading and flowing fabric. She looked radiant, genuinely happy, and I felt a surge of emotion that surprised me. Despite everything, despite the distance and the hurt and the casual cruelty of being overlooked, she was still my little sister. I still remembered teaching her to ride a bike, helping her with algebra homework, sitting up with her the night before her SATs. I also remembered, with perfect clarity, the phone call from my mother 3 months ago complaining about the cost of that dress. $10,000, she'd said, and they were already over budget with the venue and the flowers and the photographer. I had called the bridal boutique the next day and paid the balance with my credit card. I didn't tell anyone. What would have been the point? They would have either refused or, worse, accepted without acknowledgement. At least this way, Rebecca got the dress she wanted. The ceremony was beautiful and mercifully brief. The groom, Tyler, was a clean-cut young man who worked in his family's real estate business. He looked at Rebecca like she hung the moon, and for that, I was willing to forgive him for being part of the world that had always made me feel inadequate. They exchanged vows, kissed to applause, and processed back down the aisle as husband and wife. The cocktail hours stretched into the reception. Dinner was served with military precision, each course timed perfectly. My table made pleasant conversation about their lives, their children, their plans for retirement. I smiled and nodded and felt utterly alone in a room full of people who should have been my people. Across the room, I could see my mother laughing with her sisters, my father deep in conversation with Tyler's father. Rebecca floated from table to table, glowing with happiness, but she didn't make it to table 18. I told myself it didn't matter. This was her day. She had more important people to see. My father stood to give a toast during dinner. He spoke eloquently about raising strong, determined daughters, about watching Rebecca grow from a little girl into this beautiful woman. He talked about her accomplishments, her graduation from Boston College, her work at the art gallery, her kindness and grace. His eyes never once flicked in my direction. It was as if I wasn't there, or worse, as if I was there, but didn't warrant mention. I applauded with everyone else, the sound hollow in my own ears. After dinner, I retreated to the bar. I needed a drink, maybe two, something to blunt the edges of this surreal experience. The bartender poured me a generous glass of wine, and I had just taken my first sip when I heard the voice I'd been dreading all evening. "Oh, Ellie, you're still here?" I turned to find Aunt Pam bearing down on me, her expression a mix of surprise and something that might have been disapproval. Pam was my mother's older sister, a woman who had appointed herself the family's social arbiter and moral compass. She was large and loud, the kind of person who dominated every room she entered through sheer force of personality. She wore a dress in an unfortunate shade of magenta that clashed with her ruddy complexion, and her jewelry could probably fund a small country's GDP. "Why wouldn't I be here, Aunt Pam?" I asked, keeping my tone light. "Well, I just thought, given everything..." She waved her hand vaguely as if that explained anything. "I thought perhaps you'd know better than to linger." I felt my grip tighten on the wineglass. "Know better than to stay at my sister's wedding?" Aunt Pam laughed, a sharp bark of sound that drew the attention of nearby guests. "Oh, come now, we both know you've never quite fit in with these affairs. All those dreary stories about your little secretarial job. Today is Rebecca's day, not yours. Surely you understand that." The words hit me like a physical blow, but I forced myself to remain calm. "I haven't mentioned my work to anyone." "Not yet," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. But you will, won't you? Once you've had a few more drinks. We all know how you get, trying to make yourself sound important. It's rather embarrassing, honestly. She leaned in closer, her perfume overwhelming. Between us, dear, everyone knows what government secretaries actually do. Filing, answering phones, making coffee. There's no shame in it, but there's no need to pretend it's more than it is. A small crowd had gathered around us, family members and guests drawn by Aunt Pam's increasingly loud voice. I recognized my cousin Jennifer, my uncle Mark, a few of my parents' friends. They watched with the kind of avid attention people give to car accidents and reality television, eager for drama but grateful it wasn't happening to them. Aunt Pam. I started, but she cut me off. No, I need to say this. For your own good, Ellie. She raised her voice, ensuring everyone could hear. You don't belong here. Not really. Your parents invited you because they had to, because of appearances, but we all know the truth. You're the family embarrassment, dear, the one who couldn't quite measure up. And the kindest thing you could do, for Rebecca and for everyone, is to leave. Go back to your little apartment and your little job, and stop trying to insert yourself into a world where you clearly don't fit. The room fell silent. Even the string quartet seemed to pause. I felt every eye on me, felt the weight of judgment and pity and cruel satisfaction. My mother's face had gone pale. Rebecca stood frozen near the head table, her hand covering her mouth. My father looked away, unable or unwilling to meet my eyes. I checked my watch. 8:47, right on schedule. I took a slow breath, set down my wine glass with deliberate care, and smiled at Aunt Pam. You know what, Aunt Pam? You're absolutely right. I should have left earlier. But I was waiting for someone. She blinked, confused by my calm response. Waiting for whom? As if on cue, the main doors to the ballroom opened. Judge Elias Thorne walked in, and the energy in the room shifted immediately. He was 73 but carried himself like a man 20 years younger, his posture military straight, his silver hair gleaming under the chandeliers. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, a subtle American flag pin on his lapel, and an expression of benign authority that came from 4 decades on the federal bench. Every eye in the room tracked his progress, as he made his way directly toward me. I stood, smoothing down my dress. Your Honor. The wine glass in Aunt Pam's hand slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor, champagne and crystal spreading across the polished wood. No one moved to clean it up. No one moved at all. Judge Thorne smiled warmly and took my hand in both of his. Eleanor, my apologies for the delay. That emergency hearing ran longer than expected. His voice, trained to carry across courtrooms, filled the space effortlessly. How is my star prosecutor holding up? All set for opening arguments Monday morning? Yes, Your Honor, I replied, my voice steady. I'd like you to meet my family. What happened next would be seared into my memory forever, not because it was dramatic in the explosive sense, but because it was devastating in its quiet, methodical dismantling of everything my family believed about me. Judge Thorne, blissfully unaware that he was detonating a bomb in the middle of the Grandview Country Club, began to talk about my work. He mentioned the Morrison case first, describing it as one of the most significant federal prosecutions in the district in the past 5 years. A multi-state money laundering operation with connections to organized crime, involving millions in illicit funds. He praised my preparation, my attention to detail, my ability to anticipate defense strategies. He turned to my parents, who stood nearby looking like they'd been struck by lightning. Your daughter is remarkably modest, Judge Thorne continued. Eleanor is one of the finest legal minds I've encountered in 40 years on the bench. She's been with the U.S. Attorney's Office for 3 years now, and I've watched her grow from a brilliant clerk into an exceptional federal prosecutor. My father's face had gone from tanned to ashen. Federal prosecutor? Yes, indeed. She clerked for me right out of Harvard Law. Youngest clerk I'd ever hired at the time. But her credentials were simply too impressive to ignore. Judge Thorne beamed at me like a proud father, which made the actual father standing 3 feet away look even more uncomfortable. Top of her class, editor of the Law Review, published before graduation. Quite the achievement. My mother made a small, strangled sound. Harvard? Full scholarship, Judge Thorne confirmed. Based on merit, of course. Eleanor could have gone anywhere, clerked for anyone. The fact that she chose public service, that she chose to use her talents to serve justice, rather than chase corporate dollars, speaks volumes about her character. I watched Aunt Pam's face cycle through several shades of red and white. She seemed to be trying to disappear into the wallpaper, but there was nowhere to hide. The crowd that had gathered for my humiliation was now witnessing hers, and the reversal was almost poetic. Judge Thorne, warming to his subject, continued, I hope you're all immensely proud. Eleanor has been handling some of the most critical federal cases in the region. Just last month, she successfully prosecuted an entire money laundering ring, securing convictions on all counts. The investigation alone took 18 months. She coordinated with the FBI, the IRS, the DEA. The amount of money she helped recover for taxpayers was in the tens of millions. Rebecca approached slowly, her wedding dress rustling softly. "You're a federal prosecutor?" Her voice was small, almost childlike. "Among other things," I said quietly. Judge Thorne laughed. "There she goes, being modest again. Eleanor, tell them about the Supreme Court brief." I felt my cheeks warm. It wasn't that significant. "Not significant?" Judge Thorne turned to address the room at large, his courtroom instincts taking over. "Eleanor co-authored an amicus brief that the United States Supreme Court cited in their opinion last term. At 31 years old, most attorneys never get within a mile of the Supreme Court, let alone have their work cited by the justices themselves. It was brilliant legal reasoning, and it influenced national precedent. The silence that followed was profound. I could hear my own heartbeat, could hear someone's phone buzzing on a distant table, could hear the faint sounds of traffic outside. Aunt Pam looked like she might be sick. Her face had gone from red to a sickly gray, and she seemed unable to form words. Judge Thorne checked his watch. "I'm afraid I can't stay long. I have an early flight tomorrow for a judicial conference in D.C. But I wanted to stop by, meet the family that raised such an exceptional young woman." He shook hands with my parents, both of whom seemed incapable of speech, then turned back to me. "Walk me out?" I followed him through the silent ballroom, aware of every eye tracking our progress. Outside, under the portico where valets scrambled to retrieve his car, Judge Thorne placed a hand on my shoulder. "I take it they didn't know," he said quietly. "No, sir." "And you didn't tell them because?" I smiled, but there was no humor in it, because it shouldn't have mattered. If they couldn't value me as a person, I didn't want their approval based on my resume. He studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded. "You're wiser than I was at your age. But Eleanor, don't let bitterness poison what you've accomplished. You've built something remarkable, regardless of whether they see it." "I know," I said, "but thank you, for coming, for all of it. That woman who was berating you, what she said was unconscionable." "That's my aunt." He raised an eyebrow. "Family can be complicated." "That's putting it mildly." His car arrived, a sleek black sedan. Before getting in, he turned back. "You'll be brilliant on Monday. You always are. And Eleanor, you don't owe them anything. Not explanations, not forgiveness, nothing. You decide what relationship you want with them going forward. On your terms." I watched him drive away, then stood for a long moment under the darkening sky. Inside, through the ballroom windows, I could see the reception continuing, though the energy had clearly shifted. People were clustered in small groups, talking animatedly. I could imagine what they were saying, how the gossip would spread. "Did you know? Can you believe? All this time?" I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt tired and sad and oddly empty. This wasn't how I'd wanted things to go. I'd never wanted to humiliate my family or prove them wrong in such a public way. I just wanted to be seen, to be valued for who I was rather than dismissed for who they thought I was. When I walked back inside, everything had changed. Distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly wanted to chat. Family friends who had looked through me earlier now pressed business cards into my hand. My father's golf buddies wanted to know about my work with the enthusiasm of men who suddenly saw opportunity in a connection they'd previously ignored. It was nauseating, this sudden attention, this transparent shift in how I was perceived based solely on a title and a prestigious name. I deflected politely, maintained my composure, but kept a careful distance from all of them. I wasn't interested in their approval anymore. That ship had sailed long ago, probably around the time my mother forgot to invite me to Rebecca's bridal shower, or when my father suggested I was wasting my potential in public service, or during any of the thousand small cuts that had bled me slowly over the years. Aunt Pam approached near the end of the evening, when most guests had left, and the staff was beginning to clear tables. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. Her earlier bravado had evaporated, leaving behind someone who looked genuinely frightened. "Ellie," she began, her voice trembling. I didn't know." "I know you didn't," I said coolly. "We all thought, your mother said you were just a secretary, that you'd never really applied yourself. And you believed her without ever asking me directly." Aunt Pam wrung her hands, her jewelry catching the light. We made assumptions. Terrible assumptions. But you have to understand, we didn't mean any real harm. I studied her, this woman who had wielded social power like a weapon for as long as I could remember. You told me I was an embarrassment. You said I didn't belong here. You did it publicly, deliberately, in front of dozens of people. You tried to humiliate me at my sister's wedding, and you meant every word." "I was wrong," she whispered. "Terribly wrong. Will you forgive us?" I took a step closer, lowering my voice so only she could hear. "Aunt Pam, you made a very clear statement tonight about who you thought I was and how much I was worth. You established a precedent, if you will. In my work, We have a principle. Once precedent is established, it guides all future decisions. You've shown me exactly how you see family, how you define worth, how you treat people you consider beneath you. That precedent stands. Her face went pale. You're not going to, you wouldn't use your position to what, retaliate? I smiled, but it wasn't kind. I don't need to do anything, Aunt Pam. You've already done enough damage to yourself. Everyone here saw what you did, heard what you said. They also saw how wrong you were. You'll have to live with that. I'm sure it will come up at family gatherings, at the club, in your social circles. That's not revenge. That's just consequences. I walked away, leaving her standing alone near the bar. I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired and sad and relieved all at once, like I'd finally set down a weight I'd been carrying for so long I'd forgotten it was there. Rebecca found me as I was gathering my things. Her eyes were red from crying, her makeup smudged despite obvious attempts to fix it. She'd changed out of her wedding dress into a simple white sheath, preparing to leave for her honeymoon. "Ellie, wait," she called. "Please." I stopped, turned. "Rebecca, this is your wedding night. You should be with Tyler." "I know, but I need to talk to you. I need to—" She struggled for words, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. About Harvard, about your job, about any of it. How did I not know my own sister is a federal prosecutor?" "You never asked," I said simply. "None of you ever asked. But why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you correct us when Mom said you were just a secretary?" I looked at my little sister, really looked at her. She was 28, beautiful, genuinely kind in ways that the rest of our family wasn't. She'd always been the golden child, the one who did everything right, but she'd never been cruel about it, just oblivious. "Because I wanted to know if you'd value me anyway," I said finally. "I wanted to know if being your sister was enough, if just being me was enough. I didn't want your respect because of my credentials. I wanted it because I was your family." "But we do value you," Rebecca protested weakly. "Do you? Did you?" I shook my head. "I wasn't invited to your bridal shower. I was seated at table 18 tonight, with strangers. I haven't been included in family photos in 3 years. Dad hasn't mentioned me in a toast since I graduated college. You just sent me a wedding invitation with insufficient postage to my old address. When was the last time any of you called just to see how I was doing?" Rebecca's face crumpled. Oh God, Ellie, I didn't realize." "I know. That's the problem. You didn't realize, and you didn't notice, and it didn't matter enough for you to wonder why I was always on the outside. I was a terrible sister." "You were an absent one," I corrected gently. "There's a difference." "Can you forgive me?" She grabbed my hands, her grip desperate. "Can we fix this? I don't want to lose you." I thought about it, really thought about it. About Judge Thorne's words outside, about the years of small hurts and casual dismissals, about the realization that I had built a life and a career and an identity completely separate from this family because I'd had to. They hadn't left me room to exist here. "Rebecca, I love you," I said finally. "I've always loved you, but I can't go back to being invisible in this family. I won't. If you want a relationship with me, it has to be real. It has to be mutual. You have to actually care about my life, not just the impressive parts. All of it." "I do care. I will. I promise." "Then prove it. Don't just feel guilty tonight and forget about it next month. Don't revert to old patterns when Mom and Dad go back to treating me like the disappointment. Decide what kind of sister you want to be and be that person consistently." She nodded, wiping at her tears. "I will. I promise I will. And Ellie?" I saw the charge on Mom's credit card statement. She was complaining about not knowing where it came from. "That was you, wasn't it? The balance on my dress?" I didn't answer, which was answer enough. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything. For being here even when we didn't deserve it. For being so much better than we realized." Tyler appeared then, gently taking Rebecca's arm. "Ready, babe? Car's waiting." She hugged me hard before leaving, and I let her. Maybe things would change. Maybe they wouldn't. But I'd said my piece, drawn my lines in the sand. Whatever happened next was up to them. I drove back to Boston in darkness, the highway mostly empty at this late hour. My phone buzzed repeatedly with texts and missed calls, but I ignored them. I'd deal with the fallout later. Right now, I just wanted to get home, get out of this dress, and sleep for about 12 hours. Monday morning came too quickly. I stood in front of my closet at 6 a.m., this time with no hesitation. I chose my favorite suit, a charcoal gray with subtle pinstripes, paired with a crimson blouse and my good heels. I pulled my hair back into its professional bun, applied minimal makeup, and studied my reflection. This was who I was. This was who I'd chosen to become. Federal prosecutor, Harvard law graduate. Someone who fought for justice and won more often than she lost. Someone who didn't need her family's approval to know her worth. The Morrison trial began at 9 a.m. I walked into the courtroom with my files organized, my arguments prepared, my game face firmly in place. The defense team was formidable, expensive lawyers who specialized in getting white-collar criminals reduced sentences or acquittals. They had multiple associates, expert witnesses lined up, and a reputation for aggressive tactics. I had the truth, the evidence, and 3 years of experience that had taught me how to present both with devastating effectiveness. Opening arguments lasted 4 hours. I walked the jury through the scheme. The fake invoices, the shell companies, the elaborate web of deception designed to hide millions in illegal proceeds. I made it personal, helped them understand that this wasn't victimless crime, that the money being laundered had come from drug trafficking, from human suffering. I introduced them to the agents who'd spent 18 months building this case, to the forensic accountants who'd untangled the financial knots, to the cooperating witnesses who'd risked everything to come forward. By the time I sat down, I could see it in the jurors' faces. They believed me. They were angry at what they'd heard. They wanted justice. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Every morning I arrived at the courthouse at 7 a.m. to prepare. Every evening, I stayed late reviewing the day's testimony, planning the next day's strategy. The defense threw everything they had at me: procedural motions, challenges to evidence, aggressive cross-examination of my witnesses. I countered each move, anticipated their arguments, protected the integrity of my case. Judge Thorne watched from the bench with his inscrutable expression, but I caught the occasional nod, the brief flash of approval when I made a particularly strong point. He'd taught me well, and I was proving it. During the second week, my phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. Just a photo, no words. She'd sent a picture from her honeymoon, her and Tyler on a beach somewhere tropical, both smiling. But she'd also sent a second photo, one that made me stop in my tracks. It was a printout of a news article about the Morrison trial, highlighting a quote from the U.S. attorney praising my work. Someone had circled it in red marker with a note in Rebecca's handwriting. My sister, so proud. I saved that photo. My mother called 3 times during the trial. I didn't answer. She left one voicemail, her voice careful and formal, asking if we could talk. I deleted it. My father sent an email with the subject line, "We should discuss things." I archived it without reading. Aunt Pam sent a letter to my office, which my assistant opened and read to me over the phone. It was full of apologies and explanations and requests for understanding. I told my assistant to file it away. Maybe I'd read it someday when it didn't hurt so much. Maybe I wouldn't. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. 4 hours for a 3-week trial with thousands of pages of evidence. That was fast. That was decisive. When the foreman stood to read the verdict, I felt my heart hammering against my ribs. Guilty on all counts. Every single charge. The defendants showed no emotion, but their lawyers looked stunned. The gallery erupted in whispers. Judge Thorne thanked the jury, set sentencing for 8 weeks out, and dismissed everyone. As I packed up my files, he caught my eye and gave me the smallest nod. High praise. From him. Outside the courthouse, I stood on the steps while my colleagues celebrated, taking photos for the office website, giving statements to the press. The U.S. attorney herself came down to congratulate me, mentioning in front of reporters that this was one of the most complex prosecutions the office had handled in years. My phone exploded with texts. From law school friends, from other attorneys, from FBI agents I'd worked with. Congratulations. Well done. You killed it. And then, at the very bottom, one from Rebecca. Saw the news, saw them interview you on Channel 5. You were amazing. Tyler and I watched it twice. Love you. I stood there on those courthouse steps, the October sun warm on my face, surrounded by colleagues who respected me, and a profession that challenged me, and a case victory that would define my career. I thought about my family, about the wedding, about Aunt Pam's words and Judge Thorne's entrance and the look on my parents' faces when they realized how wrong they'd been. I thought about the girl I'd been, desperate for their approval, willing to make herself smaller to fit into their expectations. I thought about the woman I'd become, who'd built her life brick by brick without their help, who'd achieved things they couldn't comprehend, who'd learned that the only approval that truly mattered was her own. My phone buzzed again. This time, my mother. I hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen, then answered. Eleanor? Her voice was tentative, uncertain. I saw the news. About your trial. Your father and I, we wanted to say congratulations. Thank you, I said simply. Would you have time to have dinner? Perhaps this weekend? We'd like to talk. Really talk. I looked out at the city before me, at the life I'd built, at the future stretching forward full of possibility. I thought about forgiveness and boundaries and what I owed to people who shared my DNA but hadn't shared my journey. I'll think about it, I said. I have sentencing hearings to prepare, and I'm being considered for a major organized crime case. I'll let you know. Of course, we understand you're busy. Important work. There was a long pause. I could hear her breathing, could imagine her standing in the kitchen of my childhood home, probably looking out at the garden she'd always been so proud of. Eleanor, we owe you an apology. A real one. What happened at the wedding, what your aunt said, what we allowed to happen. Mom, I interrupted gently. Not now. Not over the phone. If you want to talk, we'll talk. But I need time. And I need you to understand that things can't go back to the way they were. I know, she said quietly. I know. After we hung up, I stood there for another moment, letting the reality of it all settle over me. They wanted to apologize. They wanted to reconnect. Part of me, the part that was still that little girl seeking approval, felt a surge of hope. But the stronger part, the part that had survived years of casual dismissal and built something remarkable in spite of it, knew better than to expect overnight transformation. The following weeks passed in a blur of post-trial work, sentencing memorandums to write, victim impact statements to coordinate, meetings with the probation office. The Morrison defendants were looking at 15 to 20 years each. The judge had made it clear he took a dim view of their crimes. I worked late most nights, my office becoming a second home in that way it always did between major cases. Rebecca called twice a week, every week. At first I was skeptical, waiting for the calls to taper off once the guilt wore thin, but she persisted. She wanted to know about my day, about my cases within the bounds of what I could discuss, about whether I was eating properly and sleeping enough. She sent care packages to my office, good coffee, chocolate, a framed photo of us as children that I'd never seen before. In it, I was maybe 10 and she was 5, and I had my arm around her shoulders protectively. We were laughing about something, genuine joy on both our faces. I put it on my desk. My father sent emails. Formal at first, then gradually more personal. He wrote about realizing he'd never asked about my work, about making assumptions based on his own limited understanding of government positions. He wrote about pride mixed with shame, about seeing my name in the newspaper and finally understanding what I'd been doing all these years. He asked questions about my cases, about law school, about the clerkship. Better late than never, I supposed, though the bitterness hadn't entirely faded. I didn't respond to most of them. I wasn't ready. Maybe I wouldn't ever be ready, and that had to be okay too. Aunt Pam, to her credit, or perhaps her terror, stayed far away. I heard through Rebecca that she'd become something of a pariah in the family, that people brought up the wedding incident whenever she got too loud or too judgmental. Poetic justice, perhaps. I felt no satisfaction in her social downfall, but I didn't feel sympathy either. She'd wielded her tongue as a weapon for years. Now she understood how it felt to be on the receiving end of judgment. Judge Thorne invited me to lunch 6 weeks after the verdict. We met at a quiet restaurant near the courthouse, the kind of place where judges and senior attorneys conducted business over white tablecloths and discretion. He ordered his usual, a Reuben sandwich and black coffee, and studied me over his reading glasses. "You've been avoiding your family," he observed. "Respectfully, Your Honor, that's not really your business." He smiled. "Fair enough, but I'm going to meddle anyway because that's what mentors do. They showed up, Eleanor." I looked up sharply. "What?" "Your parents. They came to my chambers 2 weeks ago, made an appointment through my clerk, very formal and proper. They wanted to understand what you do, who you are professionally. They asked intelligent questions. Your mother took notes." He paused, sipping his coffee. "They're trying. Trying now that they know I'm important. Trying now that they've been forced to confront their own failures," he corrected gently. "I'm not saying you have to forgive them. I'm not saying their timing isn't suspect or their motivations aren't partially self-serving, but they're trying. That's more than many parents in their position would do." I pushed my salad around my plate. "What did you tell them?" "The truth, that you're brilliant, dedicated, and one of the finest attorneys I've known. That you've accomplished more in a few years than most do in entire careers. That their ignorance of your achievements was willful and shameful." He met my eyes. "I also told them that you're hurt, deeply and justifiably, and that rebuilding trust would require genuine effort and time. Years, possibly. I told them you didn't need them, which I think frightened them more than anything." "Good," I said, then felt guilty for the vindictiveness of it. "Eleanor, I've watched you build walls, strong ones, necessary ones. You needed them to survive and thrive. But don't let those walls become a prison. Don't let past hurt keep you from present possibility." "That's very philosophical for lunch conversation." He chuckled. "I'm 73. I'm allowed to be philosophical. Besides, I'm speaking from experience. I didn't talk to my own father for 15 years over hurts far less egregious than yours. When he died, I regretted the years I'd lost more than I'd ever regretted the initial wound." I sat with that for a moment. "I'm not ready yet." "Then don't be ready. But leave the door open, even if it's just a crack, for your sake, not theirs." 2 months after the trial, on a Saturday morning in December, I finally agreed to have coffee with my parents. Not dinner, not at their house. Coffee, at a neutral location, with a defined endpoint. I chose a Starbucks halfway between Boston and their home in Connecticut, public enough that there couldn't be a scene but quiet enough for actual conversation. I arrived first, ordered my latte, and sat at a table near the window. When they walked in 10 minutes later, I was struck by how much older they looked. My father's hair had gone completely silver since I'd last really looked at him. My mother had new lines around her eyes and mouth. They looked nervous, uncertain in a way I'd never seen them. "Eleanor," my mother said, and this time my name in her mouth didn't sound like disappointment. "Thank you for meeting us." We sat in awkward silence for a moment, them with their coffees, me with mine, all of us unsure how to begin. Finally, my father cleared his throat. "I've been trying to figure out how to say this for weeks," he started. "Your mother and I have written and discarded a dozen speeches. We've rehearsed, debated, consulted with a family therapist, and I think, in the end, it comes down to this. We failed you, profoundly and repeatedly. And we're sorry." I waited, saying nothing. My mother picked up where he left off. "We made assumptions about your life, your choices, your worth. We accepted a narrative that made us comfortable rather than actually knowing our daughter. We prioritized Rebecca without acknowledging we were diminishing you. We allowed family members to disrespect you. We were," she struggled with the word, "we were bad parents. To you. For years." "Why?" I asked simply. "Why wasn't I good enough?" My father flinched. "You were always good enough. You were exceptional. That was the problem." I stared at him. My being exceptional was a problem? "You left," my mother said quietly. "You left for college and you never really came back. You built this life we couldn't access, couldn't understand. You had professors and mentors and colleagues. You had Judge Thorne. You didn't need us, and we didn't know how to handle that. So you decided I was a failure?" My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. "You decided that because I chose a path you didn't understand, I must be doing something worthless?" "We were defensive," my father admitted, "and stupid, and small. You challenged our worldview simply by existing outside of it, so we diminished you in our minds to make ourselves feel better about losing you." "You didn't lose me," I said, and was surprised by the emotion in my voice. "I was always right here. I came home for holidays. I answered when you called. I tried to share my life with you, and you couldn't have been less interested. Do you know how many times I started to tell you about law school, about my clerkship, about my job? And every time, you'd change the subject or make some dismissive comment or turn the conversation back to Rebecca. I stopped trying because it hurt too much to keep offering myself up for rejection." My mother was crying now, quiet tears that she didn't bother to wipe away. "I remember. Now that you've said it, I remember all those moments, and I hate myself for them." "I don't want you to hate yourself," I said tiredly. "I just want you to see me. Actually see me, not the idea of me or what you wish I was or how I reflect on you. Just me." "We want that too," my father said. "We want to know you, the real you, if you'll let us." I looked at them, these people who'd raised me and hurt me and were now asking for another chance. I thought about Judge Thorne's words about walls and prisons. I thought about Rebecca's persistent calls and the photo on my desk. I thought about the fact that life was short and uncertain, and holding on to bitterness was exhausting. "It won't be easy," I said finally. "I'm not going to pretend everything is fine. I'm not going to immediately trust you with the important parts of my life. You're going to have to earn that, slowly, consistently, and there are going to be boundaries." "Whatever you need," my mother said immediately. "I mean it. I won't be coming to every family dinner. I won't be performing my accomplishments for your friends' approval. I won't be Rebecca's shadow or Aunt Pam's target. If I'm going to have a relationship with you, it's going to be real and mutual, or it's not going to exist at all." "We understand," my father said, "and we agree. Whatever pace you set, whatever boundaries you need, we'll follow your lead." We talked for 2 hours. Really talked. Maybe for the first time in a decade. I told them about law school, about the grueling years of studying, about the terror and exhilaration of my first oral argument. I told them about Judge Thorne's mentorship, about choosing prosecution over more lucrative options, about the satisfaction of holding powerful people accountable. They listened, asked questions, didn't interrupt or dismiss. My mother took notes again, like she had in Judge Thorne's chambers, desperate not to forget or misunderstand. When we finally left, my mother hugged me carefully, like she was afraid I might break or disappear. "Can we do this again? Maybe in a few weeks?" "Maybe," I agreed. "I'll let you know." Over the following months, we rebuilt something. Not the relationship we'd had before, which had been fundamentally broken, but something new. Something more honest, more equal, more respectful. My father read articles about federal prosecution to understand my work. My mother asked about my cases, remembered details, followed up in later conversations. They were tentative at first, like people learning a new language, but they improved. Rebecca and I grew closer too. She came to Boston once a month, made a point of taking me to dinner, of being present in my life. She brought Tyler, who turned out to be genuinely nice once I got to know him, outside the context of the wedding. She asked about my work, my apartment, my non-existent dating life with the kind of sisterly nosiness that felt warm rather than invasive. We were building something real, and I treasured it. The organized crime case I'd been considered for came through in March. A RICO prosecution involving labor racketeering and political corruption that would take years to build and try. It was the kind of case that would define a career, the kind that prosecutors spent their entire lives hoping to get. I said yes immediately. Judge Thorne called me into his chambers the day the case was announced. "You're ready for this," he said without preamble. "But it's going to consume you. 3, maybe 4 years of your life, 60-hour weeks, threats probably, stress that will test every limit you have. Are you certain?" "Absolutely certain," I replied. He smiled. "Good, because I've recommended you for something else too. There's a vacancy coming up on the district court bench. I've submitted your name to the Judicial Selection Committee." I felt the air leave my lungs. "Your Honor, I'm 32. And brilliant. And experienced beyond your years. And exactly what the bench needs. Young, sharp, unafraid of powerful interests. You won't get it this time, probably. You're too junior. But you'll be on their radar. In 5 years, maybe 10, when the next vacancy comes up, you'll be ready. And more importantly, they'll know you're ready." I walked out of his chambers in a daze. A federal judgeship. It was the dream I'd barely let myself acknowledge. The pinnacle of a legal career. To be considered at 32 was unheard of. To actually achieve it would be extraordinary. I called Rebecca first. She screamed so loudly I had to hold the phone away from my ear, then immediately started planning a celebration dinner. She called my parents on three-way, and I listened to my father's voice crack with emotion as he said he was proud of me. It felt genuine. It felt earned. It felt like something I could accept without resentment. That evening, I stood in my apartment overlooking Boston Harbor, glass of wine in hand, and thought about the journey that had brought me here. The years of feeling invisible, the casual cruelties, the wedding where everything had finally come to a head, the look on Aunt Pam's face when Judge Thorne walked in. The shift in my family's perception, the slow, painful rebuilding of relationships I'd thought were irretrievably broken. I thought about the woman I'd been, desperate for approval, willing to shrink herself to fit into spaces that didn't want her. And I thought about the woman I'd become, who knew her worth, who'd built something remarkable, who'd learned that the only validation that truly mattered came from within. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I opened it cautiously, then felt a chill run down my spine. It was from Aunt Pam, the first communication since the wedding 6 months ago. "Eleanor, I know I have no right to reach out. I know what I said was unforgivable. But I saw the news about your new case and the possibility of a judgeship. I wanted you to know that I lie awake sometimes, thinking about that night, about the things I said. I was cruel and wrong, and I destroyed whatever relationship we might have had. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I see you now, really see you, and I'm ashamed of how long it took. I'm ashamed of who I was to you. You deserved better. You deserved respect and acknowledgement and celebration. I hope you're happy. I hope you're surrounded by people who treat you the way you should have always been treated. And I hope someday, maybe years from now, you'll think of me with indifference rather than anger. That's more than I deserve, but it's what I wish for you." I read it twice, then set my phone down. I didn't respond. Maybe I would someday, maybe I wouldn't. The message wasn't really asking for anything, which I appreciated. It was an acknowledgement, an apology without expectation. I could accept that, even if I wasn't ready to do anything with it. The sun set over the harbor, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. My apartment was quiet, filled with the life I'd built. Law books and case files, photos from law school and the U.S. Attorney's office, the framed picture of Rebecca and me as children. This was my space, my sanctuary, proof of everything I'd accomplished on my own terms. I thought about Judge Thorne's warning about walls becoming prisons. I thought about my parents' genuine efforts to change, about Rebecca's persistent love, about the possibility of healing without forgetting. I thought about holding people accountable while still allowing for growth, about setting boundaries while leaving room for connection. The work ahead would be enormous. The RICO case alone would be all-consuming, full of danger and complexity and the kind of high-stakes litigation that could make or break careers. There would be long nights, difficult decisions, powerful people who wanted to destroy me for threatening their interests. But I'd faced dismissal from my own family and come out stronger. I'd faced public humiliation and turned it into vindication. I could face whatever came next. My phone rang. Rebecca again. "Hey, we're downstairs. Tyler and I brought champagne and Thai food. We're not taking no for an answer." I smiled, surprised by the warmth that spread through my chest. "Come on up. Mom and Dad want to know if they can drive up tomorrow. They want to take you to dinner, something about making up for lost time." I hesitated, old instincts warring with new possibilities. Then I thought about the woman I wanted to be, the life I wanted to live, the relationships I wanted to cultivate. Tell them yes, but I'm picking the restaurant this time. "Deal. See you in 5? I set my phone down and took a last look at the city before my doorbell rang. Somewhere out there were the defendants I'd prosecute, the justice I'd seek, the career I'd continue building. Somewhere out there was a future federal judgeship with my name on it, waiting for me to grow into it. Somewhere out there was a version of my life where I was valued and respected and loved by my family because they'd finally learned to see me. But right here, right now, in this moment, I was already whole. The approval I'd once craved so desperately no longer held power over me. I'd found my worth in my work, in my accomplishments, in the knowledge that I'd built something remarkable without their help. If they wanted to be part of my life now, it would be on my terms, with boundaries I set and standards I maintained. The doorbell rang again, more insistently. I heard Rebecca's laugh through the door, heard her telling Tyler to hold the champagne steady. I smiled and went to let them in, ready to celebrate with people who actually saw me, who valued me, who understood that worth wasn't conditional on perception. I'd spent years being invisible. I'd spent years accepting scraps of affection and attention, grateful for whatever I could get. Those years were over. I'd stepped into the light, claimed my space, demanded recognition on my own terms. And if some people couldn't handle that, couldn't adapt to the reality of who I actually was, that was their loss, not mine. I opened the door to Rebecca's grin and Tyler's champagne and the promise of an evening surrounded by genuine affection. Behind them, metaphorically and maybe someday literally, stood my parents, working to earn their way back into my life. And behind all of it stood years of accomplishment, of hard-won success, of becoming the person I was always meant to be. The wedding had been a turning point, but not an ending. It was the moment everything shifted, the moment I stopped accepting less than I deserved. Everything after was just the beginning of a life lived on my terms, with boundaries set and worth established, and a future bright with possibility. I raised my glass as Rebecca popped the champagne. To new beginnings, she said. To being seen, I countered. To my badass federal prosecutor sister who's going to be a judge someday, she amended, and we all laughed. We drank to all of it, to second chances and hard-won respect, and the complicated, messy, beautiful process of becoming who you're meant to be. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt truly, completely at peace with exactly where I was.